So welcome to another episode of the Seanfidential Informant. Today we have on IFBB Pro, the world's strongest bodybuilder and entrepreneur, Stan Efferding. Stan, how's it going, man?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you coming on. So I want to know, Stan, when did you start training and when did you start bodybuilding?
When I got to college in 1985, I was a 140-pound soccer player, and my coach told me I needed to bulk up. And so I went to the gym that summer, and I just fell in love with it. And so I just quit playing soccer and started lifting, and I've been doing it ever since. 35 years I've been training and competing.
My God. So you were 145 pounds, you said?
Yeah, 140. I wrestled 98 pounds as a freshman and sophomore, 106 as a junior, and I was 115 as a senior. So
okay,
I was a skinny kid, that's for sure.
Yeah. So you had some background in wrestling as well, though.
Yes.
Okay, nice. So Stan, you started training weightlifting, but when did it kind of go over into bodybuilding, or was it always, was the goal to be a bodybuilder, or?
Yeah, the goal was to be a bodybuilder. I just lifted heavy weights or as heavy as I could. I was pretty weak. I couldn't even bench 135 as a freshman. I remember having to take the 45-pound plates off and put the 35s on just to get a rep. And that's as a freshman in college, around all the frat boys at the local gym, and so that was humiliating. But I always assumed that the heavier I lifted, the bigger I would get, and I just didn't know at the time that wasn't scientifically sound, and I've long since discovered otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. Who inspired you, Stan? So did you look at like guys in your kind of era, bodybuilding era? Did you look at like Arnold, Dorian Yates, guys like that? Were they inspirations to you to get started, or?
It was just the bodybuilders on the magazines at the time. Of course, I got Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding and started doing all of the exercises in there. And then eventually, started following that crew in the late 80s, early 90s, the Flex Wheeler and Chris Cormier and Paul DeMeo and the rest of those guys that were coming up in the early 90s. Okay.
I have a question kind of about powerlifting. So when you're trying to build your total, should you focus more on like your strengths or your weaknesses? So, I mean, if you got a big squat and your dead's kind of lacking, should you kind of spend more of your recovery resources on the deadlift, or should you focus more on your squat? What do you think?
Well, you always try and push both. You don't want to decline in any certain area. We call it concurrent, or what Louis Simmons kind of quoted as the conjugate system, that you want to improve, you want to maintain everything and improve on other things, but there is competing resources in terms of your recoverability and your fatigue from if you're doing both heavy deadlifts and heavy squats, because they both tend to be hip hinges in a powerlifting sense. Most people will do a low bar, which turns into a bit of a hip hinge for squatting. And it's almost the same movement as deadlifting. And so they tend to actually support each other. And when you talk about weaknesses, like if your deadlift's weaker than your squat, that's not the way I look at weaknesses necessarily. I look at weaknesses as what part of the chain is preventing you from getting a bigger deadlift or a bigger squat. And that's something that we work on. That's something that bodybuilding was very good for. We do a lot of different exercises from a lot of different angles. And so you don't end up with a hamstring weakness or a glute weakness or a spinal erector weakness, because you're doing T-bar rows and you're doing hamstring curls and a lot of things that the traditional powerlifter may not always incorporate and maybe not in sufficient volume to get stronger in those areas. And at the end of the day, or at the beginning of the day, if you want to be an elite powerlifter, there's just a certain amount of weight to height ratio, a certain amount of muscle mass that you do need to accumulate. You can certainly get stronger without gaining significant size, but there's a limit to that. Most of your world record powerlifters are going to have significant muscle mass. And so, it's wise to include some hypertrophy training, which, can also be called accessory work and also be focused on your weaknesses. So we just don't leave any stones unturned when we're trying to maximize performance.
For sure. So when I was powerlifting, I always would do, like my 3 main exercises. I do my squat, my deadlift, my bench. And then for a while, I found that, we kind of got away from what you're saying, like hypertrophy training and accessory work. We didn't do a whole lot of it. Did you, like, when you were starting and decide to enter powerlifting competitions, did you say, or would you say you train kind of as a bodybuilder or a powerlifter?
I trained as a bodybuilder, a lot of volume, load, a lot of sets times reps, progressively loading weight over time. I just tried to use heavy weights, but I still got sufficient repetitions in. We might work up to 1 single, which in retrospect was similar to what Westside does with their max effort days, is they work up to a top single, and then the rest of the work will be volume. And a lot of that volume will be in weak points, generally posterior chain or deltoids or something that might contribute to one of the big lifts.
Do you think that lifters have kind of gotten away from that type of hard training that kind of like Westside did in the early days of bodybuilding? People aren't, it might not be your experience, but my experience lately, I find a lot of the stuff that's coming out is saying, don't push yourself for that extra rep, leave a few in the tank. Do you find that it's bad that we've gotten to that point, or what's your take on that?
I think that's good advice for advanced lifters, but as a beginner, you really haven't achieved a level of, I don't want to call it experience, is I guess what I would say. The limiting factor isn't your strength. It's generally going to be neural adaptation, your coordination, your ability to recruit the muscle tissue in such a manner that can optimize the movement. We know that from beginners. Beginner gains, they kind of gain from just about anything, but a lot of that's just neural adaptation. They just get more coordinated. They get better at the movement from practice. And so those folks can train pretty heavy and pretty hard and still recover. I think the concern is that as you become a more experienced lifter, if you do too many max effort lifts, the fatigue may prevent you from training again with the amount of frequency and volume that would optimally drive growth. It's not that it's bad for you per se, but in order to super compensate, you have to recover from the previous workout. And so I don't mind leaving a rep or 2 in the tank here or there, but I think it depends. There's some context as to who the lifter is. Is the lifter an experienced lifter who's accumulating a lot of fatigue and maybe sore all the time and overreaching and possibly not recovering from workouts? In that case, I back off a little and try and reduce fatigue so that they can get more frequency. And volume's a pretty big driver. As you get stronger, the only way to get stronger is to continue to increase volume load, sets times reps times weight over time. If you continue to do what you've always done, it's going to be pretty difficult to justify, to apply the kind of stimulus necessary to make another progression. And those progressions become harder and harder to achieve, and they become smaller and smaller and take longer and longer. And I just think that the biggest mistake that people make, which is a mistake I made at the very end of my career when I stopped competing bodybuilding and I spent the last year and a half just powerlifting, I didn't do enough volume. I was just powerlifting. And what we call our GPP, our general physical preparedness, my foundation, my base, was not supporting the amount of recovery that I needed to continue to excel. And even though I hit my biggest total in my last meet, my squat was not what it had been 2 years prior, and my bench was not what it had been 2 years prior. Just had a really big deadlift that day, and that kind of compensated for what otherwise might have been just kind of a repeat performance of what I'd done previously. I didn't progress the rate I had progressed previously because I was not doing the same amount of volume, and I was grinding on powerlifting for 18 straight months. Whereas I used to just power lift for 8 weeks, and then I'd bodybuild for 3 months. Then I'd power lift for 8 weeks and bodybuild for 3 months or more, 3-4 months. So I was giving my body the much needed rest, the volume, the variety, the hypertrophy that supported, the GPP for powerlifting. So I don't know if that's kind of a word jumble or not, but I just, just to summarize, I think that you have to continue to measure and push volume time, because the tendency is, as a power lifter, to do less and less, fewer total repetitions, fewer total sets, more rest periods, more days between body parts, in order to get to just to linearly progress on a max lift. And I don't think that's a wise way to do it. I think that you get strong for a short period of time and then you start getting weaker.
So say you're a new lifter and you're starting out. What's the optimal reps? Is it 20 reps? Is it 12? What do you think you should start at for your sets to kind of build that core strength?
Well, for strength, you want to keep the reps lower and the weight higher, around 85% of your 1 rep max. But if you're just looking to build muscle for hypertrophy, it doesn't matter. 85% of your 1 rep max for 5 reps is equivalent to 70% of your 1 rep max for 10 or 12, is equivalent to 50% of your 1 rep max for 20 plus reps in terms of hypertrophy outcomes. So long as you get, as you equate for volume and you get sufficiently close to fail, within a rep or 3 of failure, then you'll have maximum muscle fiber recruitment, which will be an adequate stimulus to grow. All 3 of those are perfectly reasonable strategies. The challenge is that the 5s and the 20s tend to accumulate in fatigue. And so now you're back to which rep range might better accommodate more frequency and volume with shorter, more frequency and volume, just your ability to train every body part twice a week and to start building the number of sets per body part from 10 a week to 15, 20 to, maybe you can handle a little more than that, 20, 25 at the most, probably, in terms of maximal recoverable volume. So but if it's strength you're looking for, then you want to train that 85% of your 1 rep max range for, 4 to 6 repetitions. The caveat to that is that everybody should train a little bit from each rep range. Even when I'm having bodybuilders train in the 10 to 15 rep range, I'll have them do 1 set of 5 with an 85% load, and I'll have them finish with an AMRAP with a 50% load for a set of 20. So they should get exposed to each of those rep ranges, because you do have different muscle fiber types that respond differently to different load and repetition ranges. So fast twitch, slow twitch. And you want to optimize all of it if possible. You're going to eke out every bit of progress that you can. So generally speaking, if you want to power build, that 4 to 6 rep range is a good place to be, but pay attention to whether or not the volume load, the sets times reps times weight over the course of the week, is sufficiently progressible so that you're not, you're doing enough work to grow.
Do you have certain days of the week? So I know like lots of people do squats on Monday, bench Tuesday, whatever. What's your schedule look like? And do you find that there's certain days of the week that are better to train certain areas or not?
Really individualistic. I don't think there's any science to suggest that one day is better than another, or that an AM versus PM once you acclimate to that time. If you're typically trained in the PM and then the next day you jump in there in the morning, you might have a deficit in performance. But if you continue to train in the morning for the next 2 weeks, you would quickly realize that would quickly become comparable in performance to what you were doing previously. So we find that the time of day that you train, it's just a matter of, are you doing that consistently so that your body's used to it? I don't worry so much about the schedule. The split is kind of what you're referring to, and that's do you train push-pull legs, or do you train full body Monday, full body Friday, or do you train upper on Monday, lower on Tuesday, upper on Thursday, lower on Friday? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. There is no best split. It's a matter of what fits your schedule. And when I say that, I mean, when are you well rested and well fed so that training bout, you can get high performance out of it? Because if you don't provide adequate stimulus that doesn't continue to progress, you're going to making gains. So I usually design the schedule around somebody's personal schedule, their weightlifting schedule. So if they're a really busy person that works Monday through Friday, I might get them in there for a full body workout on Wednesday night that only takes 40 minutes. And then I'll spend the weekends catching up on all the volume by splitting, say, chest Saturday morning, back Saturday night, legs Sunday morning, hamstring Sunday night. And so I'll get, I'll get some prioritization. I'll get some, the total volume for the week satisfied, but I'll have put most of the work on the days that they've had the most rest and sleep and can invest the greatest effort into the training session. Having said that, I also base it on recovery. If when I was training with Flex, it was 13 years ago, and all I did was eat, sleep, and train. I was sleeping 9 hours a night, napping every afternoon, eating 7 times a day. So I went to the gym twice a day, AM, PM, push-pull legs, but I would split. Push would be, chest in the morning, shoulders and tris at night. Pull would be back in the morning, biceps at night, and legs would be quads in the morning, hamstrings at night. The workouts never lasted more than an hour. The night workouts probably weren't even 30 minutes. But we were able to get an extraordinary amount of volume in, and I could go back to back. I could do 6 days straight, push-pull legs, day off. Nowadays, I'm 54 now, and so
you look great, by the way.
I train legs twice every 8 days. I'll do usually what I like to do if I'm designing my own schedule, which sometimes I'm not, because I'm down in Albuquerque every other week training with Jon Jones, and so I train on his schedule that works best for him. But if I'm designing my own schedule, I'll just do upper body Monday, day off Tuesday, lower body Wednesday, day off Thursday, and then I'll repeat that. And that's on an 8-day schedule. So I'm not really getting legs every Monday night. So it's changing. The day is changing every week, but I'm getting sufficient recovery. I need a full 72 hours before heavy leg bouts in order to get recovered and be able to do it again. Because I'm still training with a significant amount of intensity, load and volume. As you see from my IG, we're still pushing it pretty hard, pretty heavy.
Yeah, for sure. I have about 7 questions from what you just asked, but we'll break it down one at a time here. I guess where I'm at right now with my lifting is I spent a lot of years of, I'm 25 now, and I started fairly young, I guess, probably 14, 15, I started. And it was probably with bad form. I got away with, pulling a decent amount of weight, but with bad form because I was young and healthy. And now I find that I can hardly pick up a plate, like deadlifting wise, because I hurt my back so badly. If I want to get back into lifting heavy again, how should I go about that? How should I go about, getting my form back and addressing that? Just start light. And what's your take on somebody like me who spent years with bad form to get back around?
Yeah, it's a 3-step progress. One is eliminate the source. And that means if you hurt yourself squatting or deadlifting, then you at the very least need to lighten that load and potentially shorten the range of motion. It doesn't mean you have to completely eliminate squatting or deadlifting, but you will most certainly want to lighten the load and shorten the range of motion to something that's within, I don't even want to say your pain tolerance, because the next day is usually when you discover whether or not you've done too much. And so better to err on the conservative side. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Find pain-free movements. And again, that could be lighter load, shorter range of motion, or just a different variation of the exercise. Whether you jump on a hack squat or you get do a high bar SSB bar with an angle plate under your heels so that you can stay more vertical in your torso, or even doing, say, a Hatfield squat where you hold on to the bars in front of you so you can stay more vertical. Whatever it takes to try and reduce the load on your lumbar spine, the shear force from the angle that you create when you descend in the squat, then that's where you start. And you progress that like you would anything else, very gradually over time, with sufficient volume. I think that volume's more important than intensity and load at that point. Just to because part of pain, there's a whole evolution of pain science in the last 5, maybe 10 years at the most, which has challenged a lot of what we have historically believed pain was. We thought pain was localized. And we're just finding that there's also a psychological component to it. There's a nerve signal from the brain that needs to be desensitized. It's a protective mechanism that your body employs to keep you from hurting yourself again. That's not to say that the pain isn't real or that there isn't some inflamed nerves or something that's causing it to recur. But some of that inflammation can, with volume under pain-free movements, will start to subside. Anyhow, some of this stuff, if you want to take a deeper dive into it, is Dr. Larimer Mosley's Explain Pain out of Australia. And the people who promote it the best, I think, is Barbell Medicine with Austin Baraki and Jordan Fagenbaum. And I attended their seminar a couple of years ago, and they went over it in great detail. And it's kind of the foundation for what I'm describing now in terms of eliminate the source, find pain-free movements, and then move often. That's a big component here. I find that doing something with more frequency, Greg Nuckols suggested when he was on my podcast, he said, and that's from Mass Research Review. For those who aren't familiar, Greg Nuckols is an extraordinary resource in this industry, a natural world record powerlifter who's also a master's degree in exercise science. He said that when people get injured, they become kinesiophobic. They fear of movement. And when you stop moving, then you stop healing and you restrict range of motion and the muscles atrophy. And so you're actually compounding the problem. It would be similar if you hurt your ankle and you put a brace on it. Well, it's going to atrophy and the range of motion is going to be impaired. So when you get a high school or collegiate or professional football player that hurts their ankle, one of the very first things they do is they put them in an underwater treadmill or with a suspension harness and start them to walk on it with lighter load, eliminate the source, find pain-free movements, and then move often. And the often part of it is that what you should do is try and move that like 3 times a day. Like with your knees, if you wanted to get on a recumbent bike and put a little tension on it and do like 40-second spin with a 20-second rest, and then repeat that 10 times, but do it 3 times a day. That's 30 minutes a day and 3 10-minute intervals. Back would be the same thing. You could just take a brisk 10-minute walk with an aggressive arm swing. You got to remember, and this is kind of preventative now, I'm going to jump over here and say that you got to remember that the core is a stabilizer, not a flexor. It's intended to resist movement, not to bend and twist. And so if you're trying to cure back pain by doing a bunch of stretching and bending and twisting, you're picking the scab. You're actually causing problems. You want to do is create anti-rotational movements, which would be an aggressive arm swing when you're taking a brisk walk, and do that 3 times a day. And then your body is resisting. You're getting plenty of blood in there, but you're not bending your spine through these extreme ranges of motion as you would say if you were trying to do some sort of exercise for the spine. It's not a good idea. It's a stabilizer, not a flexor. So I wouldn't do sit-ups and hyperextensions and side bends.
You're killing me here. This is all the stuff I've been doing.
I'm sorry. I went through this with Eric Spoto, the world record bench presser. I trained with him for 3 years. He hurt his back, and he kept going into the chiropractor. And the chiropractor kept bending and twisting and stretching. Yeah. And he would feel good for an hour or two, and then he'd be tragic for till the next visit. Yeah. And you get up off the table, and you're like, oh yeah, that feels good. Well, you actually did more harm than good. You've been better off not bending and twisting, and that's not to say that chiropractors and physical therapists can't be helpful. It's just that they shouldn't be bending and twisting you to a significant degree. I call them facilitators of movement. If you have pain, that's not allowing you to do any of the things I just mentioned, and they can provide some sort of relief of that pain, maybe with a little active release therapy or just some desensitization. That all they did there was provide you access to movement. Now, the movement itself is the gateway to pain relief. And the treatment by the physician, by the physical therapist or the chiropractor, isn't the fix. That just allows you to move through a greater range of motion. Now you need to move. And that's the actual fix to the problem. And I should also say this, 95% of pain resolves itself spontaneously within about 4 to 6 weeks. And so any intervention that you pursue, whether it's cryotherapy or one of those little copper bracelets on your wrist or a chiropractor or a physical therapist, 95% of people are going to experience a relief of pain within 4 to 6 weeks, and they're going to attribute that pain relief to whatever therapy they were pursuing, and they will be adamant about it. Oh, this guy was great. You got to go to this guy.
Yeah,
and
I've heard
and
it.
that's the problem. That's the problem. But there is no standard of care amongst all those providers. You go to 10 different providers, they give you 10 different diagnoses and 10 different treatment protocols. And that's the frustrating part about that whole pain management industry, is that and that's not to say there aren't some good therapists. It's just that people should understand what they are and what they aren't and what your personal responsibility is. I say this. I say things that are done to you or for you are rarely as effective as things you do for yourself. And that's that whole list of passive therapies, getting adjusted, getting electric stem, getting cryotherapy, getting gua sha, getting, you name it. You name the passive therapy where you just sit there and do nothing. And I will assure you that it's mostly placebo effect, unless it affords you some relief such that you can now move with less restriction, and the movement itself becomes the healing force.
Well, that's a great take. I really like that. And like I said, you killed me a little bit because it's stuff that I've been doing, but it makes sense for sure. I want to jump back to bodybuilding just for a second.
Sure.
How do you know if you have good enough genetics to actually even want to pursue bodybuilding?
Well, that's a good point, because a lot of the guys, like Jay Cutler was the same size when he was 18 as when he was winning the Olympia. A lot of those guys are hyper responders and they explode very quickly. If you're a slow gainer, the likelihood that it's just going to take you a lot longer, and probably it's genetics reigns supreme. It's most certainly a big factor in that. And that can be true overall, and it can be true of particular body parts. And that, even with performance enhancing drugs, some people are hyper responders to those. Some people have more androgen receptors. So, it's never an even playing field. If you want to be center for the Los Angeles Lakers, there's a good chance that
I'm not going to be.
Your parents are going to determine that long before you ever pick up a basketball. And that, it's true of any sport. I've got a Samoan son that, he was 6'1", 315 pounds when he was 15 years old. Probably not going to be a marathon runner.
I wouldn't say.
So go with your strengths. I find it interesting that there's been a lot of folklore about kids lifting weights, and they talk about it in terms of wrestlers, that it can stunt your growth because they see all these wrestlers are lifting weights and they're short. Yeah. Well, by the same token, does playing basketball make you taller?
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't. What happens is that the better wrestlers, the same thing would be true of gymnasts, the better Olympic female gymnasts tend to be very short. It's just hard to hurl a 5'11" body up in the air and do a bunch of flips. And so as time progresses, the ones that are more have a genetic predisposition to that sport in terms of height and body composition, et cetera, and they tend to look more like the better athletes in that sport. And that would, again, anthropometrically, their height, body composition, muscularity, whatever that may be, whether that's a distance runner in Kenya or a 4'11" gymnast or a 7-foot center. Genetics reign supreme, and you can make a lot of progress in bodybuilding. There's no question, but there's a limit to what you can accomplish as compared to someone else. I've been humbled in this industry, repeatedly. I've traveled all over the world. I've been in 12 countries in all 50 states, done over 200 seminars, like constantly, just in some ordinary gym run into somebody that you're just like, wow, and they've got some freakish body parts, or they've got some ridiculous lift, they're a specialist in, and it just blows you away that how many people tend to have a predisposition for one thing or another that most people could work their whole lives and probably not obtain.
Yeah, for sure. When I want to jump back to one thing you said there about, saying kids that lifting weights would stunt your growth. Do you find that there's an age that people shouldn't be lifting weights if they're too young, or should they start whenever? What's your take?
They can start whenever, and generally speaking, the younger they are, the more coordination you want to instill upon them. Things like dips and chin-ups and push-ups and jumping and climbing and sprinting. And I'll say sprinting twice, because I can't say enough about how important that is for any child that wants a foundation to become an athlete in almost any sport. Sprinting is a phenomenal way. And think about it in terms of pressure in pounds per square inch under the foot. You get under a squat. How much could a kid squat at 8 years old? If you were to measure the force on a force plate for pounds per square inch of a kid squatting, it wouldn't come anywhere close to that of him just sprinting or jumping. Mm-hmm. Nowhere close. So the idea that the impact, that the loading from weightlifting could be detrimental when compared to just jumping off of something at the playground, or just normal sprinting. It could be 7 to 15 times the load as compared to weightlifting. So weightlifting is very, very safe. I would just recommend that it's one of many foundational principles that kids need along, strength, coordination, obviously, speed. And so I would just, make sure that they participate in there's plenty of research to suggest that 3-sport athletes perform better in high school and college than 1-sport athletes. And I don't necessarily, and that's of course that speaks to whether or not specialization is advisable at a young age. I think it more explains the benefit of year-round movement. Whereas if you specialize in a particular sport, you might have periods at which you're not active training. And if you're playing 3 sports a year, then you're moving all year round in a variety of different planes, movements, upper body, lower body, strength, speed, hand-eye coordination. Those are the foundational skills that upon which you can quickly get the skill set to specialize in almost any sport. The kids who are bigger, stronger, and faster, even if they're a little behind in their skill set, they can quickly catch up. But if if you're undersized and slower, you're going to have a hard time competing with somebody who even has inferior skills than you.
For sure. No, I like that take a lot. Let's talk a little bit kind of about the dark side of bodybuilding with a lot of the deaths that have happened recently, Rich Piana years back, Dallas McCarver, different guys like that. How much is due to the gear, and how much of it is due to them just not taking care of themselves?
Yeah. And, I know all these people. I've known them and trained with them. Phil Hernan, Sean Roden, Andy Hammond, John Meadows. These are all people. I've been in the business 35 years. These are all people I've trained with, I've spoken to, eaten lunch with, and there, but for the grace of God, go I. Super physiological doses of performance-enhancing drugs have a lot of side effects. And they're certainly not healthy by any stretch of the imagination. And I wouldn't recommend that folks push the limits, because they can have dire consequences, as we've just discussed. There are other factors that are caused by, but maybe controllable, preventable. And this is a lot of what I do for my athletes, because I work with a lot of big athletes. And I myself, as a powerlifter, have bulked up to over 300 pounds multiple times throughout my career. It's usually in the off season. It's usually when they have thick blood and high blood pressure. That's the number one cause, is a cardiac event. And both of those things are controllable. I have a high blood pressure quick fix kit that in my ebook, the Vertical Diet 3.0 ebook at stanefferding.com. The book itself goes over sleep, nutrition, digestion, blood testing, hormones, blood pressure, blood sugars. It covers everything you can imagine, because those are the things that my athletes have needed over the years that I've worked with, and I've put those into very specific kind of a hierarchy of most important things to address, such as if you have sleep apnea, wearing a CPAP. I can tell you many of the names we just named had sleep apnea and high blood pressure and did not wear a CPAP and died in their sleep. So that's critical. It's one of the first things that I do. Weight loss is obviously a huge component to that, carrying around too much body weight. Most of those, or a number of those athletes that we've just discussed, were in the off season and were at their top weight, 280 plus pounds and 300 pounds in the case of a couple of them. And that's obviously going to have a huge impact on sleep apnea and blood pressure and blood thickness. Donating blood periodically. And I have a whole section in my book on when to donate and what factors to look for. I use a company in the US called Marek Health, MAREK, health.com. You can get a very comprehensive blood panel that covers everything we're discussing and more, from your metabolic panel to your CBC, your blood sugars, your testosterone, your prostate, your insulin, thyroid. I'm just trying to name these off all off the top of my head. Your iron, obviously your lipids, all of those things for about $110. It's dirt cheap.
Yeah.
$110, and you can get a very comprehensive panel from MarekHealth.com. It's a company that I use, and you just print out the paperwork and take it to a local lab corp, and they email you the results within 3 days. You don't even need a doctor.
Wow!
And it tells you what the ranges are, and it shows you where you're high and low. And I have a very detailed. I list all of these things in my ebook and what to do about them. So anyhow, I'm not trying to go on this long sales speech. I'm just saying that these are the things that I've been doing for my athletes for more than a decade. Guys like Hafthor Bjornsson, Brian Shaw, some of the biggest athletes in the world. And we control their blood pressure first and foremost. That's number one. That's a killer now. We control their blood pressure. And we use the high blood pressure quick fix kit. We resolve sleep apnea. We get sufficient potassium and calcium in the diet, which has a significant effect on controlling blood pressure. We check the thyroid function, because thyroid can have a significant effect on blood pressure. We do the 10-minute walks after meals. I don't think people appreciate what a big impact blood sugars are on blood pressure. Hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance is a huge impact on blood pressure, because it impacts the kidneys, and the kidneys immediately affect blood pressure. So we control blood sugars. And one of the things we do in addition to the CPAP, which has a huge impact on blood sugars, is the 10-minute walks after meals. And that can lower blood sugars by 30%. It's more effective than metformin. The number one prescribed diabetes drug in the world is metformin for type 2 diabetes. Just taking a 10-minute walk after each meal is twice as effective. So you see big guys like Hafthor taking 10-minute walks. There's a whole bunch of benefits to it, as you've seen in a lot of my stuff that I talk about. But it can be life-saving. It can reduce your blood sugars, reduce your insulin levels, which hyperinsulinemia is a huge contributor to high blood pressure. And so we control blood sugars in order to control blood pressure, along with all the other things I mentioned. So there's a whole variety of things in there, and this is why the vertical diet is very specifically has some certain foods in it, mostly high in potassium and calcium as a foundation, fruit, potato, yogurt, and potato being twice as high in potassium as a banana. So there's certain foods I have in the foundation of the diet that I want all my athletes to eat, because they provide those very important micronutrients to help with general health. And then, of course, we address the sleep and the 10-minute walks and the CPAP and the blood testing. And maybe donating blood if you have thick blood. Those are probably the two biggies. If I wanted to narrow it down, in high blood pressure and thick blood are probably the two biggest problems, and high blood sugars. And lipids is a long-term problem, but we mitigate that as well. I mean, just with general health and nutrition, you can control your LDLs as well, and your ApoB, things that are good predictors of cardiovascular disease risk. We I try and get in front of all of that. All my athletes give me a blood test as soon as I start working with them.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has got to be good for, not just athletes too, like doing the whole 10-minute walk thing. I've heard you say it before. That's got to be good just for the average person to take that advice, right? And go for a walk.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah. And lower the blood sugar.
Yeah. Well, we know that not just lifespan, but health span is significantly influenced by cardiovascular fitness, your VO2 max. And the health recommendation is that you get about 150 minutes a week of cardiovascular exercise in. 30 minutes a day, 3 10-minute walks is 210 minutes a week. And it's a brisk walk, and it's intentional. You're kind of swinging your arms a little bit, and that actually satisfies it's sufficient in terms of the cardiovascular work to get you a VO2 max that would translate into a decreased all-cause mortality and just general fitness. Besides that, I mentioned the digestion benefits, the blood sugar benefits. Besides all of that, it's sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big piece that we tend to miss here, is that I can tell you what you need. Everybody knows what they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
You need to move more and eat less. That's truthful. You cannot deny that is factual. You need to move more and eat less. It's truthful, but it's not useful, because if it were easy, we'd all be doing it. It's simple, but it's not easy. So you have to find ways to get people to move more and eat less that is easy to comply with. And anytime you ask somebody to go to the gym and do a 40-minute bout on a treadmill, it's not sustainable. It's not terribly effective for weight loss to begin with, but it's not enjoyable. It's not sustainable. There's too many barriers to entry. You got to get your car, drive to the gym, do the treadmill, drive home. We're busy. We don't have time for all that. You can eat your breakfast and take a 10-minute walk. You can go to dinner at a restaurant and then take a 10-minute mall walk, or just walk down the street for 5 minutes and walk back, unless you live where you're at.
I know. I was just thinking, I'm like, should I go for a walk today or not? Break my neck.
But then you throw a recumbent bike in your living room or your garage. That's what Hafthor does. He lives in Iceland, for Christ's sake.
No excuses.
He takes 3 10-minute. Yeah, he just goes out and he sits on his bike. He takes his little iPad out there and he watches a brief video or something. And I was up there with him. We did it, 3 times a day while I was there for the whole week I was there. Hafthor is incredibly disciplined. He's religious about things that he believes in. And he got a CPAP. He increased his vitamin D. He took the 10-minute walks. He added potassium and calcium to his diet. And you're looking at a 440-pound man with a systolic blood pressure of 136.
Crazy.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. Lane Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles was 312 pounds when I started working with him.
Mm-hmm.
And his systolic blood pressure was in the 150s. And I got him up to 332 pounds. He put on over 20 pounds and his blood pressure was in the 120s.
Wow.
It went down. Mm-hmm. So it's not always just weight related. He had to add the CPAP, do the 10-minute walks, increase his potassium and calcium. Those were the major factors for most of these great athletes that I work with. If they do those 3 or 4 things, and the high blood pressure quick fix kit has about a dozen things. It's multifactorial. There's no one fix. But the guys that are disciplined and implement a handful of these things consistently will see a significant drop in blood pressure and then an improvement in performance as a result.
For sure. I want to talk about TRT for a minute here. Guys who have low test, even like young guys, I mean, is this something that you would suggest that they get on? What's your take on TRT?
It depends what low is. In the normal range, there's not a big difference in terms of performance outcomes, hypertrophy or strength, between, say, 300 and 800. I know that people think that that's significant, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen this over and over in tests. That's why when somebody's promoting a test booster supplement, they'll always talk about, 300% increase in testosterone as compared to the placebo. It's not meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't result in any measurable outcome of benefit. That having been said, if you have associated symptoms, erectile dysfunction, depression, loss of lean muscle mass, increased body fat, fatigue, those kinds of things. And you're unable to resolve those with other lifestyle factors, CPAP, regular exercise, just a few of the things we've just discussed. Weight loss obviously is key, because the fat is where aromatase enzyme is released, which converts testosterone and estrogen. So by losing fat, you can increase your free testosterone. If you can't resolve those problems and you go in and you get diagnosed as, hypogonadal, which is, somewhere below, depending on the scale, 200, and you have associated symptoms, then absolutely it's recommended that, as would anybody that was hypothyroid, if you had Hashimoto's or, any kind of medical condition that warranted supplementation, then you should do that under the supervision of a medical professional. Most people don't. Most people just use black market performance enhancing drugs, or they go to one of these prescription clinics and which they'll just write them testosterone prescription just because they went in and said that, they had a bad day or whatever. But then all of the things I just mentioned become imperative. Get regular blood tests, monitor your blood pressure and blood thickness, and do it somewhat responsibly if you can. I don't think that testosterone use is particularly dangerous, depending on the dose, of course. But people respond differently. Some people have bit greater side effects than others, as we mentioned earlier. Everybody responds differently, and so you can't just stick your head in the sand and be blind to it. You just get a blood test and check your blood pressure regularly, and make sure that you're acting somewhat responsibly for these decisions that you're making.
For sure. I want to talk about Jon Jones for a second. So are you his coach right now? What's your scoop with him?
Yeah.
And what kind of athlete is he? I mean, because I know he's the GOAT MMA guy, but when it translates over into weightlifting, what kind of athlete is he?
I'm down. I was running Jon Jones's camp, and so he has a lot of coaches. He has a strength coach, conditioning coach. He's got a jiu-jitsu coach. He's got a boxing coach. So I coordinated everything, and I trained with him. And obviously my specialty is strength and conditioning and nutrition. And so we just got him on a diet and started making sure that we were measuring and progressing his training over time. Jon, his foundation is wrestling. He's an incredible wrestler. And he's also pretty damn strong, particularly in the pulling movements, because wrestlers tend to be that. They have a great grip and a great back strength, also fantastic stamina. So what we do with any athlete, Jon as well, is we just take them through a bunch of tests and try and see what they're not good at. And then try and implement a training program that optimizes that. Try and improve their speed, their power. Posterior chain is generally a weakness for a lot of people, glutes and hamstrings. And so we incorporate, all those movements into his strength training program, and we've been able to better round his strength. And he's seen a significant improvement in performance as a result, which is, ultimately the goal. Any athlete is going to improve performance if they can get bigger, stronger, faster. We also had to, understand that ultimately he's a fighter, and he can't just get as heavy as he wants at the sacrifice of power. And power being not just strength, but also, explosiveness, we call speed strength. And so, we would measure things like high jump and broad jump to make sure that he wasn't losing any of his explosiveness, any of his power as he was gaining weight, because now he's moving up into heavyweights from 205 to the top of the heavyweight class is 265. And so got him up to 250 pounds. His broad jump got longer, and high jump got better, and his speed is improved. We used an overspeed treadmill to measure how fast he could run, and we progressed that over time. So by all measurements, he's progressing greatly, and he's already an incredible fighter, and he continues to box with pro boxers and wrestle with national champion wrestlers and work with, fantastic coaches that know MMA. And I think he's going to be ready.
The heavyweight champ. Who do you think's a better matchup, Francis or Cyril Gagne for him?
Well, I think he's confident either way.
Mm-hmm.
Francis has that one equalizer
Touch
he
of death.
catches you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's challenging. If you just, because then, you know, everything can end. Just one moment. If he just catches you one time. Having said that, Jon's skill set is superior everywhere else. So that's certainly a good challenge. And then Surreal Gone is, he's a lot like Jon in many ways. But I think as well, Jon's skill set is superior on across the board. I think that would be really interesting. That would be a really interesting matchup to see in terms of skills. But the Nagano fight is one where you just hold your breath, you know?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
You know,
definitely. I have to ask you a couple questions that my brother sent me in, because he'll kill me if I don't ask you these. My brother's name's Alex. Alex goes, what does John Hack have to do better, do to be better than Ed Cohn in your eyes?
His squat, his bench, and his deadlift are already really close. I think his squat, and you know, I hate to compare Hack and Cohn. I mean, Eddie Cohn obviously is what he set 150 world records. So, I mean, it's going to be hard. But Hack is, boy, he's a phenom. He's a living legend himself. That guy, it just blows me away. He just bench pressed 600 the other day.
Yeah,
was he 220?
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Deadlifts 900. I think that, and he knows this too. This isn't news. I think if he can get that squat up into the mid eights, it's just lights out. He squats a lot, kind of straight up and down. And I wonder if a lower bar squat with a hip hinge might be a good direction for him long term. I just don't know. I haven't worked with him myself, and so it's always easy to, from the outside looking in, to make some recommendations. But you'd have to see somebody actually do the movement to determine whether or not it fit their strengths. But yeah, he's phenomenal.
Yeah, phenom for sure. All right, his second question here is, you said before, add a gimmick, add a plate. So I guess like knee sleeves, knee wraps. However, the past couple of years, it looks like you've been mostly unaided. Is this for longevity purposes or something else?
It is. Yeah. Every time you add a gimmick, you're worried that some other joint will take the burden and blow out. And so I stopped adding gimmicks after a while. Also, after I rehabbed my chronic tendonitis in my knees and hips, I didn't see the sense in trying to re-injure them with anything acute, anything dynamic, I suppose. So these are weights that I can handle with no pain. And I also travel a lot. And so I don't always have, you know, this bar and that, you know, accessory to carry around with me, the shoes, the sleeves, the wraps, the whatever. I don't tote them around everywhere. So I tried to go about as naked as I could, so I could do it anywhere, time, under any circumstances. And, you know, knee sleeves are that beneficial, but mentally speaking, once you start using them, you get hooked. Yeah. And so now I do everything I can just in shorts and a t-shirt and let it rip. And I want the weakest link to remain the weakest link, because as soon as I shore that up, then I'm gonna someplace else is gonna feel the burden.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think powerlifting should be an Olympic sport?
Yeah, I'd love it. I don't see any reason why not. I think it's easy to judge. The challenge, of course, is drug testing it, but that's true in any sport. So, you know.
For sure. Well, I think that's all I have for you here today, Stan. I mean, this was awesome. I've had a lot of questions for you for a while, and you addressed it. You made me feel like some of the stuff I was doing was stupid for a couple of years, but that's a good thing. And no, it's awesome. I really appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, you're welcome. You know, in my ebook, I link over 200 links to research, videos, articles that are written by professionals in each of the different things that we discussed. Mm-hmm. So you just don't have to take my word for it. I encourage people to say, do your research. I went so far as to put the names and the faces and the articles and the videos of the PhDs, the professionals that we talked about today, that support the information that I'm providing. And we're very fortunate now. We didn't have the internet when I was starting out. It was all trial and error and all, guru this and bro science that. It's all out now. It's available, and the resources are extraordinary. I list all the resources, and so if people need some more science behind all things we discussed, I put it in there. I don't take responsibility for all of this, and I don't think that you need to anymore. You don't have to be a guru. You just say, this guy's an expert in pain. This guy's an expert in nutrition. My co-author, PhD registered dietitian, who was dietetics for UNLV. And, everything I can to get to steer people towards the best information, and so you don't just have to take for it because I'm a meatneck that lifted a lot of weight.
For sure. One last one for you, actually. You got your hand in a lot of businesses. I know you're on Shark Tank before. What are all the businesses that you got your hand in right now?
Well, I owned a telecommunications company that eventually had over 100 employees in 2 states. Wow. I bought and sold for $60 million in real estate, multifamily, single subdivisions, and commercial real estate before the collapse of 2008. I owned and operated an engineering firm where we did outlets for Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Siemens, Raytheon for many years, and now I've transferred almost exclusively into the fitness industry. Of course, I've got the meal prep company, the Vertical Diet meal prep company that's nationwide. We just expanded into the UK. We have some delivery in Canada, but I'll tell you, the shipping and the taxes have been prohibitive. It just hasn't been cost effective. But I describe all our meals in the book, and it's not hard to do. It's pretty easy. And then, of course, the seminar circuit. I've done 200 seminars in countries in all 50 states, including a whole bunch at Good Life up in Canada, coaching their coaches for until the COVID shutdown. Yeah. And that's the major portion of it. Of course, then we released the book, the Vertical Diet book, which is worldwide on Amazon, and my ebooks. I've expanded ebooks from how to make a living in the fitness industry, powerlifting, strong, stronger, strongest, speed training, fast, faster, fastest, and then of course the Vertical Diet 3.0 ebook is all in my. And I'm coming out with the Vertical Kids next year, which is going to be a fantastic read for parents who want to optimize their kids' genetic potential.
What's it called there, Sarah? You kind of cut out when you said it.
Oh, it'll be the Vertical Kids.
Okay.
Vertical Kids, and that'll teach parents, just like all the stuff we do today in terms of weight training, nutrition, genetic predispositions, and optimize their kids' genetic potential. And so that's pretty much what I've been doing, for the last 4 or 5 years. Has been all industry focused.
You're a busy man, Stan. Well, listen, I really appreciate you coming on today. I know my brother's going to love that we got some of his questions answered, and I look forward to keep following you on Instagram, see what you're at, and thanks for coming on, man.
Great, brother. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good one. We'll go for a walk out in the snow now. Thanks for listening to that episode. Find us on social media at the SFI Podcast.